Welcome back to Indyfest 2022. Now, the moment that I know some of you have been waiting for, at least the some of you who are running for office, which is our exclusive poll results that were done by OHPI. We've had a partnership with them for some time, and they did a statewide poll. They just got out of the field a couple of days ago, and I have with me, I'm really happy that he came over from Arizona, especially since he's got a newborn. Mike Noble is here. Thanks for coming, Mike. I really do appreciate it.
John, I appreciate you having me, and it's such a pleasure to be out here at the Silver State, so thank you for having me.
So before I show people the results, they're going to kill me. I'm going to delay that the suspense. I want to make sure that people understand, of course, and you know this as a pollster, it's just a snapshot in time. All the other cliches are true. I want to tell people about the only, people like to say that cliche about the only poll that counts is one on election day, but the only poll that counts before then is the one that can properly model what the turnout is going to be, and it's very difficult this year. And I want everyone to know that I told Mike that I wanted a turnout that probably is slightly favorable to Republicans, which is 36% Democrats, 36% Republicans, and 28% independents. At this point, my guess may be as good as anybody's. I want to let people know that the actual registration is 33% Dems, 30% Republicans, and 37% independents. Was that crazy of me to come up with that turnout scenario?
No, absolutely not. And that's what's interesting about polling. And polling during presidential elections is much easier, I would say, because everyone turns out. It's right. It's the show. But when you have the midterm elections, I would say midterm elections are arguably the most difficult to poll, because that is truly the guesswork of who is going to show up. And that truly matters. And so, I'll give you a perfect example. When we're looking at last election in 2020 in the presidential, we were looking at this great state of Florida. In Florida, and all the polling showed inevitably that it looked like Biden was going to carry that handily. Not only did Trump take it, he took it pretty handily as well. And I talked to some of the best polling firms in the country who were polling that race, and they all missed it. And I'm like, well, how'd you get it wrong? They actually they underrepresented the white share of the vote and underrepresented the Hispanic share, and they also didn't really get down into the details of figure out that whole Cuban component that was going on over there, and they all end up missing it. And so turnout is huge, but I don't think you're wrong, because right now Republicans are fired up because you look at the pendulum or the balance of power that we see is that Democrats currently hold the presidency, Senate, and Congress. So they're in there, but they're not as motivated because they're there. They have the control, but the folks that are out of power are typically more motivated. And right now, Republicans are pretty fired up. So I don't think that's I think it's pretty darn close to probably what it's likely to be.
And you're going to say that publicly. John was right.
Correct.
All right, that's
correct. 100%.
So one of the things I think must be really hard for you, it's certainly hard for me to get a handle on, especially in this state. You've had this rise of independent voters. It's 37%. They're the plurality now. They're ahead of both of the major parties. But you also have this phenomenon where the DMV has motor voter. People go, and if they don't choose a party, they're being automatically registered as nonpartisans, and so nonpartisan registration really surges. So I don't know if 28% of the electorate is right for non-major party voters or not. I mean, the problem I would think, Mike, which is a unique problem here, is that some of these people may not have even known they were registered. Some of them may be happy they were registered independent, but may not vote because they don't vote in great propensity, especially in midterms. So, I mean, 28%, I'll be honest, is just kind of a guess, right?
Well, yeah, because with independents, it's a good point, because especially when you're auto-registering them, you get a whole mixed bag. You get those folks that, yeah, great, I'm glad I'm registered, thanks for saving me the step. Other ones, they could care less about voting. And that's just, people you have different segments of it. And what I say with the independents, but I don't think, I think with that number, I think it's going to be pretty darn close. But what we do know is that Republicans are fired up. Democrats weren't all this off year and this election year until Roe v. Wade happened. That actually helped give them a kind of a little jolt. They were a bit anemic prior. And that we see, though, independents, though, are definitely less enthusiastic than the two major parties, because they kind of bicker back and forth. And it's like two siblings that are together bickering back and forth, and you're stuck in the middle. It's not enjoyable, and it doesn't get you motivated as much.
Yeah, I mean, we still don't know what the so-called Dobbs effect is going to be on this electorate. It's a real wild card. Finally, I want to let everyone know that we are going to post this entire poll in the spirit of the Indy's transparency. And people will see, and I'm kind of a maniac about this. We haven't known each other this long, but I look at every little internal, and they can be off. The internals, like 100%. Clark County numbers look a little weird in this one to me. Some of the other internals look weird. The top lines all, I think, are plausible, actually. But to explain to people what I'm talking about, these are much smaller samples in the subgroups, and so they can be off.
Yeah, 100%. And is that if you look at comparing it to other polls or other trends that we've seen, obviously here in Nevada, is that when you're looking at, let's say, the 18 to 34 group, there's only about 170 or so respondents in there, and with that group, your margin of error is up there in the 8 percentile range. So margin of error, just make it easier. When you're looking at that number, think of the margin of error of the fuzziness of the number. So, okay, it's at 35%. If it's a margin of error of 8, that could be 43%, or that could be 8 points lower in the other way. And that in the sample, I would say that, when you go there, you take the list, you randomize it, but you, of course, have response bias, whether or not people take the poll or not. But also, Nevada is a battleground state. It's in the top 5 for spending, broadcast spending, but also, I mean, it is just getting enamored. And not only that, I believe that of the main Senate races, because the battle is really about the U.S. Senate this cycle, and the Senate, Nevada has, hands down, I'd say, the most competitive Senate race, because you see Mehmet Oz, he's a little bit behind there in Pennsylvania. You see.
Don't give away any of the numbers until I put them up there, sir.
Oh, okay. Oh,
so let's do that, because people are going to kill me if I don't put the numbers up.
So, but just put a pin on it, though, John, is that when you have the sample and you randomize that, you get your audience that's in there, and sometimes you can get a little bit more Democrat, a little bit more Republican. That happens in there, and or you could be like some other groups that don't show it. But that's the thing, is that we do the polling, we put it out there, and I'll save the rest for later. But.
Yeah, we wouldn't be publishing or talking about these results if I didn't have faith that these numbers are pretty close, at least right now, at the beginning of October. So let's talk about the race that we just had the debate in. We're going to put the numbers up for the governor's race. I should say that this poll has a margin of error about 3.6%, 750 sample, I think, 741. So there you have it. Joe Lombardo, the Republican, sheriff of Clark County, at 45%. Steve Sisolak, the governor, at 42%. And I'm glad you're using none of these candidates, which a lot of pollsters don't use, but it's significant. 8%'s a lot to be in there, although that includes others as well. But 13% that would not choose either candidate. Mike, do you find that to be high, low, about right at this time of year?
That's 100% about right. When you get to these big races, the Senates and governor races, the one that they really spend, because when you look at those top 2 compared to the down ticket, they're not in the same zip code when it comes to the spending that happens on them in the earned media, people chattering about them. And you get down to the last 45 days of the election day, you'll have about 10 to 14% undecided in any given race, and seeing polls over the cycles. It's right about where it should be. But it's interesting on this race is that you'll see with the Republicans in general is that Republicans are performing well with males, but Democrats are doing really well with females this cycle.
No, but that's not that unusual, and that actually may be an indication of a Dobbs effect starting to build, right? I mean, is that possible? Is that a possibility?
100%, that's a possibility, and that's one of these big unknowns. Roe v. Wade's been talked about for 4 decades, and then all of a sudden we had this now get injected into the election, and again, it's an unknown because we really don't have much historicals to go off of.
It's interesting because, I've seen so many polls, my eyes glazed over. But whenever I look at speaking of the internals, you see it's usually 52% women, 48% men. And the more that number goes up, even though, of course, there are women who are pro-life as well, but if you see the number of women going up in the turnout, and we can see that in early voting here. We can actually see that. That may be a canary in the coal mine for Democrats.
I think you're right. And we didn't drill down because we had limited space. We want to get to the main stuff. But we've done a ton of polling on this because we poll in consistently in Arizona, Nevada, and Utah. And so when looking at all these states is that we see that, especially when it comes to the female demographics, so you look like suburban moms or younger Republican females, 18 to 34 females, you see that when it comes to this abortion issue, we ask them, how will this impact your vote? Will this make you more motivated? And we see that they're incredibly high. They're like in the 70 percentile range. So there's a lot of indicators right now showing that that's the case. And now the question is, will they show up? Because the interesting part is that there's not really any ballot initiatives or items like that that are on there to really coalesce and go around it. I think it's going to be a massive issue next election cycle, but that's kind of the unknowns that I think we're going to see.
So if you're Joe Lombardo and you see this number, you see you're 3 points ahead of Steve Sisolak, almost at the margin of error, but still within it, are you saying, okay, maybe I'm pulling away, or is this still just a pure toss-up in polling terms?
That's a great question. So it's funny, a lot of people get fixated on the number, like, oh, you said +2, +3. Here's the thing. If, let's say you did 3 polls, one said, let's say Lombardo's +3, it's even, and then Sisolak +2. All of them say the exact same thing, that the race is a toss-up. It's absolutely tied, and that's the thing, is that this race is incredibly competitive. And not only that, is that the next, is it 37 days left till Election Day? Those are truly going to decide, who is going to be the CEO. Are you going to continue with the current one, or are going to have a change in leadership?
So you wouldn't be surprised if either of these candidates won?
Oh, 100%. It's unequivocally a toss-up.
Okay, speaking of toss-ups, let's take a look at the U.S. Senate race, and Mike already spoiled my fun by saying what it was, but here it is. Adam Laxalt, the Republican former Attorney General, has 45%. The incumbent Democrat Catherine Cortez Masto at 43%, and about the same number of, 12% in this case did not choose either candidate. Now, there's not much different between that result and the result in the governor's race, right?
Not a ton. And again, that's the thing, is that this electorate right now that we're seeing more than ever before is that it's become so hyper polarized between the red team and the blue team. I like to liken them to. And that what you're seeing in these races, that a lot of these races really come down to about, I don't know, it's like 1/8 of the electorate, the true independents. Because especially when you look at independents, about 1/3 of them are actually Democrats, about 1/3 are actually Republicans. So the ones that really aren't party loyal, it's a small but mighty group. But it doesn't surprise me in the least of where these races are at right now.
Another pollster I know, though, says it slightly differently than you just did, which is there's no such thing as an independent. Even those who are registered as independent, in the back, what they care about, what issues they're interested in, and if you ask them enough questions, you'll be able to, after a while, know that they're really leaning Democrat or leaning Republican, right?
100%, yes. And that's the thing, is that you do have a lot, though, that because of the hyper-partisanship that's going on, you're seeing this drive. You're seeing it in Arizona, you're seeing it in Nevada, you're seeing it actually all across the country, where independents are the fastest growing voting bloc. And I know you've done a lot of reporting on that. And it's true, because, again, they're just kind of getting sick of the infighting, and people are like, there's really not a home for me, and they're just going there, but they're single-issue voters. You got a whole mixed bag in there.
So I'm wondering, as I said before, I explained this, turnout scenario I think is slightly favorable to Republicans because it's above registration, significantly above registration for them. It would be 6% above registration for Republicans, 3% above. If you're a Republican like Adam Laxalt or Joe Lombardo, and you see this kind of lead, isn't the conclusion, well, there better be some kind of red wave, or at least something akin, even a mini red wave, because if there's not, these numbers flip, right?
100%. I would say they're absolutely in trouble. And again, that's the thing with the Roe v. Wade, the X factor that's out there. If younger voters come out, or let's say younger voters because of the debt reconciliation that Biden just did, which I'm pessimistic on that, but you never know. But again, younger voters don't really vote in midterms, and that's the thing. It's all about who shows out, and what really upsets the apple cart is who comes out and votes. And if Democrats are able to match that or even get close, but Republicans 100% need to be banking on the wave this year. If not, it ain't going to be good come November 8th.
Yeah, I mean, the Republicans, as we're about to see, are doing well in every race in this poll, and something really pronounced starts to happen as you go down the ballot. So let's take a look at the next race, which is the race for Attorney General. Aaron Ford is the incumbent, and he's trailing by 2% in this poll to Sigal Chattah, who is an attorney here. But if you look if you look at the unsure and other none of these, it's almost it's double what it was in the Senate race, and even just slightly under double what it is in the governor's race. So you're starting to say, as you alluded earlier, Mike, not as much money is spent, not as much attention is spent, and there's probably more just, oh, he's the Democrat, I'm for him, or she's the Republican, I'm for her, if you're wearing the jerseys. But there's this significant number of people, a quarter of the vote here, who probably don't know much about either of them, right?
You're exactly right. And so when we look at these down tickets, and we see this trend all the time, is that when it comes to the top two races, folks are very much decided, because again, they've been messaged to, they've been informed. There's a lot. It's more interesting to talk about overall. But then when you look at these down ticket races, that you have a ton of undecided. That number is about right for right now. But where you see that number really start to move is once voters receive their early ballot. Like, oh, I have to make a decision on this. Who are these folks? What are their issues? What are their stances? And you'll really start to see that move down. And that's where I think the next, I'd say the next few weeks here in the race are really going to be critical, mainly for these down ticket races, because of those folks that they just don't really pay attention to the down tickets.
I mean, and if there's any kind of wave, either way in an election, if you're down ticket, you can get pulled up or pulled down by that, because it's unlikely that either of these candidates are going to be able to spend enough money with all the TV time bought up by the governor and Senate races to really punch through. So they're really going to be dragged up or down by what happens at the top of the ticket, probably, right?
You're exactly right. And look no further than the 2008 elections when Obama was on the ticket. You talk to any consultant out there that was on the Republican side, they had said it was because they all got their butts kicked up and down the ballot. And they said it was a toxic political environment, was the way they framed it. But again, when you have these national winds going, whether it's to the left or the right, when you're down ticket, you're kind of hostage to exactly of how that's going. But these statewide offices, and especially more down to the local level, you're going to see that.
So let me show you what I think is probably the scariest result that you found, which is in the Secretary of State's race, where an election denier and conspiracy theorist by the name of Jim Marchant, who's the Republican candidate, has an 8-point lead over Cisco Aguilar, who is starting to get on TV now, but is still relatively unknown. And you still have a third, just under a third of the electorate that's undecided. I mean, that's kind of scary, Mike, that a guy who, I mean, he has said all manner of crazy stuff, and he was actually pushed through the primary, or at least promoted by the Democrats, who recruited Cisco Aguilar, who mostly because he's very well liked and has no record, but nobody knows who he is, right? And people know who Jim Marchant is, mostly for bad reasons, and still he has an 8-point lead in the race.
Well, it's interesting. Most people, their heads have exploded. We put out a polling just a few weeks ago in Arizona, because we have a very similar dynamic. We have Mark Fincham going against Adrian Fontes. Mark Fincham was actually at the January 6th event. He's an election dyer. He's basically Arizona's version of Jim Marchant. And it's interesting. He was actually up 5 in our poll just a week ago. And a lot of, I feel so many calls from media saying, that can't be right. There's no way. And I go, whether you agree with it or not, that's where it's at. But the most interesting thing about this race, that 30% is unequivocally going to decide it. So that race, it may look like an edge to Marchant. Again, those 30% as they start paying attention, if money starts being spent. And a lot of these down tickets, since they have finite resources, they always hold their money till about the last 30, 45 days, and then really try to spend that right when those voters are making the decision, and they don't typically spend early at all on these contests.
Is there about the same amount of undecided in the Fincham race too?
Yes. All the down tickets. Again, you see the same trend. Is the down tickets are at least double the rate of undecided compared to the two top of the tickets. Because again, if you quantify it between the earned media and paid media standpoint, they're just not in the same zip code.
It seems to me, and one of the advantages that Democrats have had in this state for a long time, Mike, is their ability to turn out their base, the so-called Reid machine, and they bank votes in early voting, so that election day is much less important. 2/3 of the vote is cast here generally in early voting. This is, if they don't get out their base, one smart strategist, Democrat, said if they don't get out their base, they could lose all of these races.
100% right. And I think the current headwinds that they're going against, which is tough right now, when we look at the top issue, so what's most important to Nevadans when it comes to their voting is it's hands down jobs and economy is number one. It's clearly number one. And if tied for a close second is education and immigration. And you see that recently, for example, on independents, their second issue actually is education. And we saw a move recently in the governor's race where Lombardo leaned into the education issue, which was interesting, but it's also very much looking at the polling of some of those key swingy voters, because those voters are voting for you, great. But that's one of the tougher parts, is that the jobs and the economy, because the folks that are in charge, Democrats have a strong control on the state. And again, it's a tough headwind that they're heading against right now.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. But I really do think that this is a base turnout election, and the Republicans, at least in many polls I've seen, and probably some you've seen and done, the Republicans seem more energized to turn out.
They are. Again, they're out of power. That's the big thing. They don't have a seat at the table. So when these decisions are being made, whether it's the lockdowns, whether it's the interest rate increases, to all these other issues going on. Plus, Biden's not helping very much as well. His numbers are slightly improving since gas prices are coming down, and that's also another key X factor, I think, too. What are his gas prices going to be like in the final 2 weeks of the election?
It's interesting, too, if you look at 2016, Donald Trump is elected. 2018 midterm, Democrats did very, very well here. Now, 4 years later, you have a Democratic president whose numbers are terrible.
Yeah.
They're not good in this poll either. And by the way, there's a lot of stuff I'm not going to show people just in this brief chat that we're having, but you asked a lot more questions than just these races. People can see, right, what do people think the state's going in the right direction or wrong direction, what the most important issues are. We did the ballot questions as well, so we're not going to disclose those now, but they'll be on the Indy site later today. Let's move on to a couple other races. The lieutenant governor's race is the one that had the biggest gap of all of these races, where Stavros Anthony, who has been on the ballot several times, is a city councilman, and Lisa Cano Burkhead, who was appointed lieutenant governor a relatively short time ago, is trailing by 11 points. And I guess the only good news for her is that there's 30% undecided here. And but the fact that Stavros Anthony has been on the ballot many times. I mean, he's run successfully for city council, unsuccessfully for mayor and county commission. Even though he's lost, a lot of people know him. And so that's a big advantage in a general election.
Correct, and that's where you look at the down tickets. They'll look pretty similar. They're kind of just going the way of the generic, but that one stood out to me when looking through the results. It's like, okay, how come Stavros Anthony, how come he's performing a little better than Burkhead? And it's interesting is that when digging into it more, because context matters. And as John pointed out there, is that people that have previous name ID that's been in office, Stavros Anthony, plus in kind of the key region in Clark County, where a lot of the vast majority of the vote derives from, again, gives a bit of an advantage there, and familiarity to the name is very helpful, especially with those races with less money on there. Because in the big races, everyone knows who those folks are because there's so much spent and talked about.
If someone's behind by double digits now, again, a little more than a month from the election, and there is any kind of wave, red wave, that person probably has no chance to come back, right?
It would be difficult, and that's where, again, the midterms are really, really about turnout, and that's why I think like events like today, for example, are so huge, because the more information voters have, and they know the more they have it, but people's votes, votes obviously matter, but votes matter far more, I'd say, in a midterm election than they do in a presidential election, and again, having that thumb on the scale, you truly have that choice of, who's going to be representing you.
All right, we have a couple other statewide races to go over. Treasurer. Another result that's going to be distressing for some. Michelle Fiore, who is always in the news and always for things that should be causing her problems, is well ahead of Zach Conine by 8 points, outside the margin of error. They're a third of the vote, as you mentioned,
yeah,
is undecided. I mean, is the same true in politics that it is in some other things? There's no such thing as bad publicity?
You know what? Nowadays, yeah, no, it's true. It is absolutely true.
I mean, unless you're getting indicted.
Correct, yeah. If you're getting indicted, yeah. No.
Although Trump says that would help him, so but go on.
In his case, I wouldn't be surprised. And when we look at politics now, think about it. Like when you talk about before, like let's say, hey, I came out with my 5-point education plan, or these things. And it's actually funny. Harvard did a very extensive study on the correlation between earned media and candidates' positions. and they found that policy was by far and away far less reported on compared to controversial issues. And if your name's getting out there, whether it's good or bad, and remember, certain people will look at it and be like, oh, that's terrible, I don't like that. But there's the other side of the coin of folks like, oh, you know what, I agree with that. And you know, unfortunately, it kind of, you're almost incentivized, especially when you look over the data. If you're a candidate, how can you not, how could you not, see it that way?
The thing about this race that's really interesting is no one knows what the state treasurer does, right? I
No
mean,
one does.
Unless you're someone like us who follow this stuff
Yeah.
all the time. By the way, I don't think Michelle Fiore knows what the state treasurer is. But having said that, Zach Conine, the only publicity that's out there about him generally is that he's got Republicans supporting him. In fact, Dean Heller, the former U.S. Senator, is doing a fundraiser for him. You got a former state chairwoman in Amy Tarkanian who is supporting him. And as I said, Michelle Fiore has nothing but bad publicity. There's a catalog of horribles on her, and yet she's ahead of a guy who, by the way, for all I know, he could be a closet Republican. Zach Conine was a very, very, very successful entrepreneur. He knows what he's doing. He cares about the office, and he is trailing by 8 points in this poll.
Well, again, and that's the thing is that it tends to go more to the generic. I mean, truly, what this race is going to come down to is that 32%, and that 32%, I'm fully convinced they're just not paying attention yet, but they will. And that's where, again, they're going to make decisions based on when they do their homework, which most voters do. I think you're going to see that shift.
It's interesting you say that, because you say they're not paying attention, but they will. I would argue that a significant number of them won't pay attention to the state treasurer's race and other down ballot races, and they will be voting for Joe Lombardo and Adam Laxalt because they're Republicans. They'll get down there. Oh, I recognize that name. I'll vote Republican. Why? You think? I mean, I hope you're right that people are actually doing research in those races, but
so not all. Some will be.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing is kind of frightening. So let's do the final statewide race. Again, a Republican is in the lead in a race for state controller, which I guarantee most people don't know what it does, and a lot of people think the office shouldn't even exist. Andy Matthews, who was in the Assembly for a term, is ahead of Ellen Spiegel, who is in the Assembly for a while. 39-31, almost again. These are almost identical, right? A third undecided. And so it just seems to me that the real worry for people like an Ellen Spiegel, a Zach Conine, and even an Aaron Ford, who's much closer, only 2 points behind within margin of error, is if there's any kind of red wave, I am not nearly as sanguine as you that people will start paying attention and suddenly make this decision based on who the best candidate is.
Well, and that's where the folks is at. They're very much beholden to the generic ballot, but voters will, or a chunk of them will, that when they get that ballot, they're looking at it like, oh, who is this person? I need to go look them up a little bit. You get that more so. And again, we see the numbers move a ton, like tracking these races over the last, 3-4 election cycles. It's interesting is that if you poll these down tickets, you'll essentially get the same number every time leading up to it until about we get close to early voting. Then you actually start seeing the numbers move. And then once they get the early ballot. But again, remember in that turnout model, we have that, we're projecting, Republicans are a little bit more enthusiastic. And again, that turnout is going to be incredibly different because if you were to adjust that turnout to, let's say, a Democrat +3, for example, these races would all be within the margin of error.
Maybe you should do another poll for us in a few weeks then.
You know, it's funny you should say that, John, because I saw when they mentioned this, he said, hey, this is the Nevada Independent's last poll of the election. And you know what? That's not going to be the case because OH Predictive Insights, we, as a nonpartisan firm, we are going to be actually doing our poll of record 10 days out. And I'm here to announce that we will be donating it to the Nevada Independent for all the great work they do. They very much align with us. They're seekers of truth. And so for us, we're going to be doing that. So we'll have one 10 days out because, fun fact, we partnered on the primary and absolutely nailed the governor and Senate races. So you could wait till election day, or we could let you know when ahead of time. And I think these races are going to look significantly different when we're 10 days out because a lot of movement will happen from now until then.
Can't wait for those results. Thank you for doing that. Finally, let me just ask you a question. You're a guy who's been done a ton of work in Arizona, and you've been trying to expand, and you've expanded into Nevada as one of the states. Is there a big difference? I used to have pollsters say, "Oh, Nevada's so hard to poll for a variety of different reasons." is different than other states. What have you found have been the challenges polling here compared to Arizona, or is that overblown that Nevada is such a hard state?
Well, it is, and that's funny. Nevada is notoriously known as a hard state to poll, like Alaska, which I've polled Alaska, and it's miserable. And so, but when you look at Nevada, is that, at least so far, we're 2 for 2 on races on record for Nevada. So
you better stop bragging, because you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, no one's ever, but it's and so far so good. But I think the interesting part about Nevada is that you really got to be keen on the transient nature of the state, and I think that is a tough part. So you really got to vet those folks a little bit more, and also really make sure you have updated voter lists. So making sure you're getting one, not using one from 3, 4, or 5 months ago, which is some of the pollsters will do it. Just making sure you're keeping on it, and I think also the splits, because not so much looking at the regional of Clark, Washoe, and then the other counties, is looking at that geographic density. So those urban, suburban, rural divide. You see rural here. Rural's very strong for Republicans, and then in urban, very strong for Democrats, and then suburban is really the key battleground that's been happening. And for example, Clark County, yes, you're in the region of Clark County, but are you in the urban portion of it? Are you more in the suburban, or in that suburban/rural area? That really does matter, and we see a big difference there on that ideological side. So.
Well, Mike, it really is great that you came to do this. Especially, I mentioned it in passing. You're on paternity leave, and you took the time to come here and talk about this poll. I really do appreciate your coming.
No, hey, thanks for having me. And if I would have known, I should have sent some photos. I got to get some great newborn baby pictures we could throw up there for you also. But no, thanks for having me. And again, what you're doing, I think, is serving a cause greater than yourself. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for saying that. And I want to say it's a wrap for Indyfest 2022. I didn't think I'd ever say those words, everybody. I do want to thank everyone here and everyone who's joined us via the live stream. We have really worked hard at Indy to enlighten people about important issues and to enliven the discussion when we can. This is all part of that. And I hope all of you who have yet to donate to our nonprofit will go on the site and feel that we're worthy of a donation. I assure you that I'm going to forget to thank some people because there's so many people to thank, without which this would never have happened. And I apologize in advance if I've forgotten somebody. So I, of course, want to thank our sponsors. Without the sponsors that we've had here, we couldn't put on this program. So we thank you. Our partners here at this spectacular studio. Some of you can't see all of it. It is spectacular. It's nicer than any studio I've been in Washington or New York. Matt Seltzer and the team for assembling the focus groups. Julie Gilday Schaefer, again, has saved us many times over, and her amazing team. And she's going to kill me for saying it. A special shout out to my pal Abby, who really makes everything here possible. She's fantastic, and she makes sure I don't screw up things too much. Most of all, as always, I want to thank my staff at the Indy. Elizabeth Thompson and the marvelous reporters work so hard every day, and they all contributed to the success of this event in different ways. Brett Burke, Katie Foley, and Megan Riley on our revenue team have gone so far beyond anything I expected, that they have worked day and night for weeks to make sure that this was a successful event. And finally, Stephanie Lauer, who is our indomitable director of operations. She is the glue that holds this entire thing together, and I will never be able to thank her enough. We are truly a family at the Indy, and I'm humbled to be lucky enough to work with all of these people. Thanks for coming this year, and I guess we better start planning next year's. We'll see you then.